It is summer 86 BC. The Pontic general Archelaus deployed his army in a valley close by Chaeronea. His scouts informed him he outnumbered the Romans commanded by Lucius Cornelius Sulla at least 4-1. He was confident this would be a swift victory over the Romans, similar to the one attained a year before in Asia Minor. As he prepared to give the command of the main attack, he heard screams and shouting from above. His army looked up towards their fellow soldiers who held strategic positions among the impassable mountains. They were horrified at what they saw, and before they knew it, the battle commenced. In 88 BC, the social war between Rome and the Italian tribes was still waging on. Besides war on the peninsula, Rome suffered problems to their east. The rogue king Mithridates of Pontus had been a thorn in their side for years. Annexing and bullying Roman client states, Rome had tried to put him back in line by invading the kingdom without declaring war. However, Mithridates not only decisively defeated a much larger Roman allied Bithynian army at the Battle of River Amnias, he subsequently also augmented his own army with the captured Bithynian mercenaries. He was stronger than ever, and following this victory, Rome officially declared war. Soon after, at the Battle of Protopacium, Mithridates again defeated a Roman army and expelled all Roman forces from Asia Minor. After that, he was in firm control of the region. The Roman commander Lucius Cornelius Sulla was the man supposed to deal with him. But besides the Roman war, he faced another roadblock. The former consul Gaius Marius wanted the command for war in Asia Minor himself. Many intrigues followed, culminating in a pro-Marius riot breaking out in Rome after Sulla left on his campaign. He heard of this riot at Nola, together with the army he raised to fight Mithridates. But contrary to the Marian faction's expectations, as it went against ancient tradition and Roman law, Sulla's army remained loyal to him instead of the Republic, and they began a slow march onto Rome. When Mithridates heard the army raised to fight him was marching on its own capital, it only emboldened the king. To ensure loyalty from the kingdoms on Asia Minor, he unleashed what became known as the Asian Vespers. He ordered all Roman citizens on Asia Minor, approximately 80,000, to be killed. Every town, village, and city purged itself of Roman citizens. Virtually unopposed, the Pontic color spread over Asia Minor. Mithridates comfortably dominated the mainland of Asia Minor and wanted more. His eyes turned to the islands in the Aegean Sea. The first island that came into his possession was Kos, severely weakened by infighting. Lesbos surrendered next without any resistance. The island of Rhodes, however, put up much of a fight, and the subsequent siege and naval battles were touch and go. Eventually, Rhodes managed to repel Mithridates' assaults. Having lost his first battle, he returned to Asia Minor to lick his wounds. He decided to leave the island alone, a decision not too surprising because there was fruitful ground to expand Pontic territory even further on the Greek mainland. Greece wasn't necessarily on Mithridates' list of territories to capture. In fact, he expected the Romans to raise an army and naval fleet. He planned to meet them in battle on the Aegean Sea and potentially on the shores of Asia Minor. But it just so happened that a pro-Pontic party ruled in Athens. They welcomed Mithridates to liberate them from the Roman yoke. Not to mention, Athens was the spiritual home of Hellenism, so ruling it would be of great value to Mithridates' legitimacy. The pro-Pontic ruler in Athens handed him the region on a silver platter. De facto controlling Athens, Pontic soldiers now swarmed onto the Greek mainland. They captured Delos, Boeotia, Euboea, and Sparta. The Romans were right to be worried. The Roman governor of Macedonia sent south whatever troops he could spare. His navy seized the island of Skiathos, setting aflame Pontic storehouses. He subsequently invaded Boeotia, engaging in skirmishes to keep the Pontic army occupied and prevent them from pushing further north. During these skirmishes, the Romans received news Sulla, with 5 legions, had landed in Epirus. The commander had consolidated his position in Rome and expelled the Marian faction. He began levying auxiliary units from territories he traveled through. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Romans were a formidable force to meet in battle. One brief skirmish between Archelaus and Sulla's army was enough to convince the Pontic general to retreat between Athens' massive walls. Thanks to the Pontic navy, the army defending Athens would be well supplied, while Sulla's supply lines were uncertain. In fact, back in Rome, his opponents had seized power again, and they did not acknowledge the legitimacy of his military campaign anymore. So Sulla had two different fronts to worry about now. But he was undeterred. He planned to besiege both Athens and its port of Piraeus. Though the Pontic navy was able to supply Piraeus, Athens was entirely cut off after several encirclement campaigns. The siege lasted for several months through the winter and spring. Then, in March 86 BC, Athens finally fell after its defense force suffered from starvation for months. The pro-Pontic Athenians were trapped while Archelaus and his Pontic army escaped from Piraeus to Thessaly. Meanwhile, to the north, the main Pontic army arrived. Commanded by Arcathius, Mithridates' son, the enormous army raced through Macedonia, cementing their control in the region. In fact, the army was large to the degree that Sulla must have suspected Athens was no more than a diversion tactic for the Ponts to conquer northern Greece. Archelaus managed to link up with the main Pontic army at Thermopylae. He took over command. Their strategy was to move south. All that was in their way was a small Roman contingent, no more than 6,000 legions under Hortensius. The Romans were in full retreat, chased through the mountains. Sulla began his march westward, both to meet up with Hortensius and because the local farms could not provide for his army much longer. As such, he started his trek westward, hopefully in time to save Hortensius' army from the pursuing Pontic behemoth. Sulla met up with Hortensius on a hill at the plain of Elatia. Sources are vague about what happened next. The main Pontic army entered the plain as well. After several skirmishes, they either captured the hill or forced Sulla to retreat preemptively. Sulla positioned his army to the east of Chaeronea, leaving a Roman garrison in the city to defend it against Pontic attacks. Leaving the garrison behind was a good move, as Archelaus sent an advance force against the city not soon after. Briefly besieging the city, they understood they would not capture it and instead moved into the hills. Here they set up an outpost above the town overlooking the valley. The main Pontic army set up camp in the narrow valley separating Mount Hedilium and Acontium. The Pontic army was well protected, snuggled between the mountains. This also meant they had no way out but through the narrow valley between the hills and rivers. Still, Archelaus didn't think a defeat was possible, considering scouts informed him of the Romans numbering no more than 20,000 troops. Meanwhile, he commanded over 100,000. However, Sulla tried to make a virtue of necessity. He knew the Pontic army outnumbered him, but he also knew the terrain was not ideal to suit a large body of soldiers. As his army was preparing itself for battle, a group of locals offered him their services. They convinced the general there was a path through the mountainous terrain. If this was true, he could ambush the Pontic garrison camping on the hill. Sulla agreed. Meanwhile, he gathered his army and ordered his men to prepare for battle. Lieutenant Murena commanded the left flank. Besides the Roman infantry, Murena also commanded most of the cavalry available to the Romans. The remainder of the cavalry under Sulla guarded the right flank. The center was manned by Roman infantry equipped with the iconic pila, heavy javelins, and their general combat equipment. Hortensius and the Macedonian veterans manned the rearguard, standing on top of a hill. They were at liberty to decide for themselves which flank they would join once battle commenced. Archelaus and his men understood battle would soon commence. Archelaus stationed the scythed chariots in the front, flanked by Pontic infantry. Behind the chariots stood the main contingent of Pontus's army, the traditional Macedonian-inspired phalanx. Among them stood phalangites made up of slaves whose only choice was to fight or face crucifixion. On the right flank stood a cavalry contingent, with behind them a unit called the Brazen Shields. As they were preparing to march onto Sulla's position, suddenly they heard screams from above. When they looked up, it took a second to make sense of what they were seeing. The Pontic mountain garrison was surprised as dozens of Chaeroneans flung themselves at them and brutally slew them. Panic broke out, and several soldiers tried to flee the mountain camp into the valley. Archelaus yelled at his main army to advance. As they approached, the view must have been horrible. Often unarmed and only wearing parts of their armor, Pontic soldiers stormed down the slope with Chaeroneans in hot pursuit. But as soon as they reached the foot of the hill, Murina's army and cavalry were there to welcome them. It is estimated around 3,000 soldiers died, barely any escaped, without striking a single blow against the Romans. But it got worse. The soldiers who managed to escape the ambush now saw their own army deployed within the valley, so they ran to them to get to safety. But the thing is, the Pontic scythed chariots stood at the ready to charge into the Roman ranks. Because their soldiers now scrambled over, they were unable to deploy them. The chariots waited for the fleeing soldiers to reach their ranks. Then, finally, losing the element of surprise, Archelaus ordered the chariots forward. With the Romans having moved too close, the heavy chariots could not gather enough speed before reaching the Roman ranks. Sulla ordered the center of his army to move aside. Quickly opening up the center, the chariots raced through, unable to stare into the Roman ranks. The riders yelled and tugged their horses to a halt once they moved through the ranks, but it was too late. Multiple units received orders to throw their javelins at the chariots as they were trying to turn around, standing still. It was effortless picking, and screams arose from behind the Roman front line, which had closed again. Archelaus could only watch. Before too long, the screams and yells subsided, until the general heard nothing except the occasional Roman commander yelling orders. As Archelaus was about to shout his orders at his men, the sky turned black. Sulla ordered his light infantry to shower the Pontic front lines with their pila. As a result, many of the lightly armored phalangists were struck and died in the hail of missiles. Having damaged the front lines, Sulla ordered his men forward. The infantry charged straight at the Pontic front lines, and heavy close combat fighting broke out. Breaking through the phalanges, heavy combat ensued between the phalanx and Roman infantry. However, Archelaus wasn't discouraged by being put on the back foot. He ordered his cavalry to charge forward into Rome's left flank, because his phalanx preoccupied the majority of the Roman infantry. Murina's flank was spread relatively thin, still regrouping from the successful onslaught against the mountain garrison. Hortensius, standing on higher ground, saw the cavalry charge forward and ordered the reserves to fling themselves at the cavalry. He hoped they would intercept them in their flank, but the Pontic cavalry was a disciplined unit. Upon seeing the Romans run at them, they changed directions mid-charge to fight them. Thus the Romans did not charge into them despite the Pontic cavalry being exposed to Murina's corps. Instead, Hortensius's men now remained on their own, fighting ferociously against the Pontic cavalry. The brazen shields now swiftly moved against Murina's troops, locking combat on the Pontic right flank. Meanwhile, Sulla had not yet seen combat. He decided to support Murina and Hortensius engaged in heavy fighting. He took units from the Roman right flank and center. Archelaus noticed Sulla moving and ordered the retreat of his cavalry. An opportunity presented itself. With Sulla midway, it meant the Roman right flank was severely undermanned. He had to move fast, and while Murina's units reinforced Hortensius, Archelaus moved behind friendly lines rushing to the Pontic left. But Sulla called on. He immediately ordered his cavalry round, and for once the Romans had the advantage in being outnumbered. It meant his cavalry was much quicker, and there were fewer obstacles in the way. Sulla was the first to reach the right flank, and his cavalry garnered momentum while the Pontic heavy cavalry was only just about past their center. Not making any speed, they could not do anything but face the fast and ferocious charge by Sulla's cavalry. It hit them hard. Fighting broke out. Being put on the back foot and suffering heavy casualties, soon the Pontic cavalry retreated in disorder. As the cavalry broke, things rapidly progressed. Sulla retreated behind his battle lines to assess the situation. Meanwhile, the phalanx was getting a rough beating from the Roman infantry. Fighting had gone on for several hours already. On the Roman left flank, Murina also gained the upper hand against the brazen shields. Heavily outnumbered, they fled the camp as well. As both flanks disintegrated, the phalanx was done for. Murina and Hortensius flanked the phalanx on the right. They had no adequate defense against flanking maneuvers, and the Romans inflicted heavy damage. Soldiers dropped their spears, and they too fled the battlefield. Because Archelaus had reinforced the camp, there was an enormous jam in front of the gates. Not all soldiers fit through. Those who were unfortunate enough to stand at the rear were mercilessly slaughtered. Sulla's cavalry chased down those who tried to escape elsewhere. The fleeing Pontic soldiers fled to the north, through the hills. They did not reach safety until they reached Chalkis, where the Pontic navy brought them to safety. It is estimated not even 10% of the total Pontic army survived the subsequent onslaught. Sulla estimated he lost 14 soldiers tops, although this is considered to be heavily exaggerated. Though the Romans killed most of the Pontic army, Mithridates was already raising a new army. Archelaus was to receive approximately 80,000 new troops, and the Pontic navy ensured he would be ready for the final showdown between Sulla and himself 1 year later. Thank you for watching this video. If there's a battle, topic or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will already gain access to additional content. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.